Hello, my name is Caroline Tran, and this is my presentation on blended learning. You may be asking, what is blended learning? While there is no one definition of blended learning that scholars can agree on, the research book titled Using Blended Learning Evidence-Based Practices by Ki-Foon Hyo and Wing-Sum Jung define blended learning as a non-traditional classroom environment where students spend a combination of time, firstly, learning away from home at a brick-and-mortar location with physical supervision from teachers, and second, learning through the internet at their choice of time, place, and speed. And you may be wondering, why should I care about blended learning? Why would I want it in my classroom? Well, similar to other non-traditional class models, blended learning can yield positive results and benefits for both teachers and students compared to a traditional schooling experience. So, the benefits are the improvement of interaction between students through tech. Blended learning can offer the ability to meet students' needs, especially for adult learners who have other responsibilities. It allows for student-teacher interaction while maintaining flexibility. It increases student outcome rates, it reduces the average cost spent on each student by the school, and it lowers attrition rates compared to fully online classrooms. The type of instruction and strategy for a classroom that utilizes blended learning is important for it to succeed. Now, after you've heard about the benefits, I hope you're thinking, wow, that sounds like a really good idea. How can I get started in implementing blended learning into my classroom? And well, if that's what you're thinking, then you're in luck. Because the same research book from Hugh and Chung defines 8 crucial steps in creating a successful blended learning environment. We'll go through them together. Step 1 is figuring out the learning goals for your classroom. Step 2 is conducting a study on what your students already know. And step 3 is determining if your classroom is properly prepared for blended learning. Before you start transitioning to a blended learning environment, you kind of want to ask yourself these questions. Is there enough time, funding, and access to technology for blended learning to succeed? Is there accessibility to the internet and online platforms? Am I prepared to adapt course material for a blended learning environment, and how would I do it? Am I also prepared to facilitate part of the classroom online? And are my students internet literate? And if you've answered highly to these questions, then only afterwards can you really move on to the next steps. Step 4 is determining the type of instruction and approach to use, which I will talk more about in the example slide. Afterwards, you can start developing the blended learning model and then implement it in your classrooms. Step 7 is getting feedback and response from students, and step 8 is making adjustments as necessary to your instruction. And before I talk too much about the examples and the approaches to blended learning, I want to make an important distinction. From the video Blended Learning and Technology Integration by Jen Johnson, Jen notes that blended learning is not the same as simply integrating technology into your classroom. In the case of blended learning, the internet are not tools, but rather a space where learning occurs. So a good portion of the content delivery and discussion in blended learning should be delivered through online platforms. Now moving on to the examples and approaches, there are a few. So the first one is station rotation, where students rotate between stations and activities, and at least one station is dedicated to online learning. Students at Spanaway Elementary School uses this type of approach. In small groups, they rotate between doing something with the teacher, working independently, and practicing math on the computer. There's also Online Driver, which is mostly remote, but face-to-face check-ins are done. There is Flex, which delivers the bulk of the material online. However, there are small in-person groups for tutoring. There's Online Lab, which also does most of the instruction online, but it's done at a physical location. And there's the Flipped Classroom, where students learn the bulk of the material at home, while class time is reserved for hands-on activities. And this is my first impression of blended learning. I had never heard of it. I had never heard of blended learning before. However, I expected it to focus on a very narrow classroom model similar to the flipped classroom. So I was surprised to find out that it was a broad definition and encompasses many types of classroom models and instructions. What I like about blended learning is that it allows teachers and students to have flexibility. I also like how it's distinct from technological integration in the classroom. However, I do dislike the amount of requirements necessary to properly implement blended learning. I think a lot of teachers would not want to switch simply because of the amount of work required up front. And lastly, I do think that blended learning has a lot of potential to grow. Using a platform on the internet as a space for learning seems really important in our digital age.